Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Service to Savings. I'm here with Greg, and today we're dealing with home buying and how to start and then transition your savings plan as you progress through your career. So, Greg, welcome back. Glad to see you again.
Always a pleasure. Happy to be here. Love talking about this stuff.
Oh yeah, it always excites me.
Well, and I think the cool thing is by us having these conversations and also when people actually contribute, like everybody's family is unique and maybe the topics are not repetitive but common and we hear them all the time, but the way that people get into them and their own like unique circumstances that factor into the variables, it's always different. So it's always interesting and I'm most fascinated when the advice that you normally give is actually ends up different.
Definitely. And this first question here is one of those ones that I think, really brings out that everyone's circumstances are a little different. So, and they just asked it in a general format, so we'll have to put some parameters around this, right? Their question was, is the VA loan the right choice for my first home buy during a PC?
It depends. Next. No.
That is a definitely a it depends answer.
It's a trap.
So, I usually organize this a couple of ways in my mind. First, my first two questions back to you would be is how long are you going to stay in the area that you're going to? Do you plan on holding in how long do you plan on holding on to the house? And then the kind of other area of question that I would ask is how much money do you have set aside for an emergency fund and for buying that home? I think those are two areas that really delineate that it depends.
So yeah, you're absolutely you hit it right on the head. The other things that I add in there are as I approach any asset, and I don't even really like to think about my primary residence as an asset because that implies that I'm trying to make money off of it. When really I'm trying to meet like Maslow's hierarchy of needs of security.
Yes.
Don't rain on me. But when we're buying these things, it should be for the long term. So I think the break even on most closing costs is about 18 to 24 months anyway. So if you're not going to live there for 2 years, we really shouldn't be considered buying it unless, again, your personal preferences is like, I'm actually trying to build a real estate portfolio. What an easy way for me to know the area and really prepare a potential asset is by living there, which is actually what I think is the most common way to get into real estate investing anyway is the live there, move out, and just keep it and rent it. I think that's what most of us do. But to answer the question, is it the right for my first home to use? Excuse me, is a VA loan the right choice for my first home buy during a PCS? It could be right if you know that you're going to be there for a while, and some of your. I like to think about this from a career progression, where like, hey, my career might actually keep me here regardless of where I'm going. So, like, if you're on a submarine, fast attack out of Groton, there is a good chance that you get orders to squadron. And then from squadron, maybe you go to sub school, or maybe you come back to a boat on the same waterfront. Like, there's this opportunity where your family could actually stay in one location despite a change in command. In which case, yeah, maybe it really would be great for you to buy that house and have that sense of permanency for your family. But if you're early in your career or life trajectory is different and you really value experiencing something completely unique and different all the time, using your VA loan probably isn't the best. What do you think?
So 100% agree with that. I've heard 3 years is kind of that break even, and that's a maybe. And when you start adding in like all the costs of owning it and all that
Mhm.
stuff, I've heard that stretches out closer to 4, which really to me then means I want to, build in a safety margin, and just because I tend to be a little more risk averse on houses because I went through the 2008, home kind of purchase price crisis. So 5 years is kind of like my window where I go, okay, now I'm leaning towards buying, right? And that can mean you're trying to homestead in an area, right? And you're like, oh, I look at the location within an hour of where I'm at. There are, plenty of different billets I could end up at various spaces. I think San Diego, right, where there's a ton of Navy bases there.
Right.
Like,
Norfolk.
you could homestead there, you could homestead in Norfolk. For the Coast Guard, New England, there's a lot of places you could end up within an hour simply because every place is small here.
Rhode Island
And
doesn't count
yeah,
as a state.
yes. And so you can easily, if you buy right, you can end up that way. And so yeah, if that's what you're trying to do or you're willing to rent out, then 100% it could be the right thing for you. That being said, a couple of things with the VA loan. Number one, the loan isn't actually issued by the VA, it's just backed up by the VA. So you still have to find a bank that's deals with VA loans and is going to issue the VA loan for you. There are some banks that cater almost exclusively to military. Think USAA, Navy Federal, PenFed, right? Like those are kind of like your big three that just like go right at military with this. I have not used any of them recently for a home loan personally, so I don't know how competitive their rates are. But I would definitely start by figuring out what all three of those rates were, and then moving on from there.
So, just I guess throwing some more numbers on that. Like there are a lot of great benefits. Like the VA is one of our greatest benefits. There's a zero mandatory down payment, so you can preserve some of your emergency fund when you're PCSing. There's no primary mortgage insurance, so no PMI, which saves you a bunch of undeductible
Yep.
money. The rates are competitive, but they're not always the best. Like that's not a guarantee that your VA rate's going to be best. So if you have 10 to 20% ready for and saved to buy a house, you might be better off with a conventional loan. So that is something to consider. But the VAs typically have more flexible credit requirements. If you're PCSing and you don't get, and there's the risk that you might be buying sight unseen, it might not be the best because it might be a great reason to go get a VA loan because they have higher inspection requirements
Right.
where they're going to actually have more due diligence if you can't get there to do it yourself or hire somebody to do it like that. When
One
we tie
thing
it specifically, go ahead, Joe.
one thing that's different with the VA loan though is they do have the funding fee,
With
somewhere like two
pros,
and a half.
by the way, we keep repeating it.
Yeah, have like 2.5, 3%, right, funding fee. You can roll that into your loan, but if you put 0% down and rolled it into your loan, you would instantly have negative equity in your home, which then takes that 24-month and probably extends it at least to 36, if not 48 months before you're able to sell the home and break even selling it.
And that actually gets me right into one of the PCS specific complications that I see. Because it's actually happened with more than one of the people that I serve. And they get orders just during the natural PCS season. They either, a good example is people like making chief or getting up to from chief to senior chief, things like that. But I've worked with a couple of chiefs where they've put in either LDO packages or warrant packages after a PCS cycle. Like, hey, we have this great job, but I've been like trying to get this for a while, and it hit in between, and they just bought a house. Like, but now they're gonna have to move because they got picked up for this great opportunity. So if you can afford the home, or the question I guess I would ask is like, can you afford the home if you PCS again and can't sell it? Like if you had to keep it on your books, would it cash flow as rental or
Yeah,
what are you going to do with that? And just know that until your other VA loan is paid off, you're not going to go out and get another one. So
right.
that's something that we should be considering when we're factoring, hey, I'm about to move. Do I use this benefit this time?
Yeah, 100%. That was, one of the hardest things was, I got moved from New England down to Louisiana. Couldn't sell the house in New England. And, being that far away and trying to rent a house is not a great situation, right? It becomes rather difficult at that point. So, in summary, it could be right for you. But things to consider are how much do you have to pay closing costs or funding fees on the VA loan? Are you going to have some equity in the home? How long do you plan on holding on to the home? And, you know, think about that, 3 to 4 year, I prefer 5 year window where you're looking at it starts to tip towards you are better off buying or you can be better off buying or it is maybe acceptable to buy is maybe a better way of putting it versus you're going to lose money on buying it.
Uh-huh.
The other thing that I'd also add to this is just remember your mortgage is the lowest amount you'll pay each month. Your rent is the maximum you will pay each month. So with that in mind, do you have the flexibility in your budget for unexpected expenses that come up?
So, and I absolutely love that saying. And I found myself, I actually had to explain myself when I said that recently. So, given the opportunity, we'll go ahead and say that if we have this mortgage, you're also on the hook for property taxes, your utilities, maintenance. So, like, to your point, my mortgage is the least amount I'm going to pay. And then all that extra stuff gets added on top. If I'm renting when a window's leaking or there's an issue, I'm calling the landlord and that's their problem. So that's just what we mean by the rent is the highest you're going to pay versus the mortgage being the lowest you're going to pay. And that's something to keep important because VA loans are powerful. Just don't let that zero down override, the basic mathematics of our primary residence.
Right. 100%. So next question, also on PCSing. So they're getting stationed about 30 miles away from their current home, about 50 miles away from their current duty station. They're trying to figure out whether or not they should move, especially because BAH at the new duty station is lower than where it was at the old duty station.
Oof. Man, yeah, this is like the death by 1,000 cuts PCS, right? Not far enough to obviously move, but not close enough to obviously stay. And this becomes also a personal dexterity or, how tough are you in commuting and what does that commute look like? When I got stationed in Groton, up until that point, I had been doing like the Geo Bachelor thing. My spouse is well rooted here in Rhode Island. So having her quit her career, which she's been in longer than me, to come down to like South Carolina or go up to upstate New York didn't make a ton of sense. But once I got orders to a boat in Connecticut, we looked at it and was like, okay, well, we live in the middle of Rhode Island. What's that commute look like? Do we need to move? And yeah, trust me, it sucked having exactly an hour drive to base every morning, especially like as you grew up the
Yeah.
rank and file ladder there. And it's like, oh no, now you get to be in a supervisor's meeting. The rest of the crew shows up here, but this is your new muster time, right? That commute matters. But for you and me, Joe, like we have 95, like our little 95
Yep.
corridor. My office to the Coast Guard Academy is 45 miles and almost exactly 45 minutes. It's a straight line. And so that's something manageable. But there's other times where like, oh, now you're cutting through a metropolitan. Like if I had to cross over Providence or something, especially with all of our bridge traffic and stuff that's happening right now, that might change my calculus, right? I might
Right.
be thinking about what that move is.
And commute brings up a big thing for me. So we're obviously both in Rhode Island. The saying in Rhode Island is if your commute to work is more than 15 minutes, you need a new job. So
Pack lunch.
yeah. And so when I was stationed in Louisiana, I had a 45-minute commute to work. That's the furthest I'd ever want to drive. And I'll say I did that largely for family reasons because I was stationed in the middle of nowhere. My wife basically looked at it and was like, "We're not living here." And so we lived in the big city that was around there, which was Homa, which isn't that big of a city, and we absolutely loved Homa, right? But you know, it's just one of those things. So look at your commute. What can you personally handle? I know people that commuted an hour and a half each way to give their family geographic stability. They never moved their family, but they got stationed an hour and a half in either direction to keep them there. One piece of good news here is if you don't move, and as long as you don't move, you can apply for and get what's called BAH protection,
Mm,
which means you get to keep the BAH of your old duty station as long as you remain in the same residence that you were in when you first got stationed there. So in our particular area, right, there's often a debate between Newport and Groton, right? Newport has about $1,000 more a month in BAH than Groton does. So a pretty significant difference. So if you are staying in the same house, you get to apply for BAH protection, keep the higher BAH then, right? So that's something that may help you out. And then, it's a discussion with your family, stability for family versus time away, right?
right.
On the
Kids
commute.
changing schools,
Kids changing schools and everything else. So
spouse
if you
changing jobs.
if you have a family, that calculus definitely adds into that decision to move or not.
So I apologize not being 100% attentive, but I got a little bit nerdy for a second there. And I stored a couple calculations here. So bear with me. Here's some real costs of not moving. And I'm just going to use our commute conversation as the first thing I did. I said, if I have to commute 10 hours a week, that's 520 hours a year. So that's like 65 8-hour work days annually that you're giving away in your car. So times that by $40 an hour, that's $20,000 of opportunity cost commuting. Don't forget just like the miles on your car and maintenance miles, wear and tear. And honestly, if you don't own the business and because we don't get to do the miscellaneous itemized deductions anymore, Like, you don't even get that 65 cents per mile that the IRS gives us. So it adds up, right?
It 100% adds up. And it can be both a psychological and a physical grind on you being in the car that long, right?
Yeah. For me, it's actually I mean, if it's in traffic, then you're absolutely right, psychological grind. But for me, it's my opportunity to do podcasts, to decompress after hard days. Like, as much as I loved being in the Navy and on submarines, like, there's always going to be those days,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes having a commute gives you that time to decompress before you have to go back and be a well-adjusted human being for your family or friends. So those are some of the costs of not moving, but then there's the real cost of moving, and we've already hit most of them. There's the actual moving costs, right? Like paying to move your stuff with PCS or renting, and potential lease breaks, your kids changing schools, new communities, new routines, everything new. Those are the good calculus. Like, if you're going to think of this like a planner, those are the two sides of the coin that I would approach this problem at.
That. And I think, it's sitting down with all the things that we just listed, writing down some real values next to them, and then having that honest discussion on, am I willing to trade either this time, or this amount of money to do this, right?
Mhm.
Uh, there's pros and cons to both. Okay, so next question. Early career, just starting out. Should I max out my TSP or my Roth IRA or both? So what are your thoughts on that to start out with?
I mean, my initial take, or my hot take, is almost every time I've run that math, the answer is yes. Math says yes with caveats. I think you and I in particular, and then maybe Doug Norman, there's like, we have this nice financial rules of engagement. I
Yep.
want you to have a baseline emergency fund first, but after that, then heck yes. I love the idea of the TSP and the Roth TSP. I like controlling for whatever my current tax bracket is. I don't want to miss the opportunity to pay the least amount of tax right now or avoid tax in the future. And there's a book, Just Keep Buying, by Nick Majuli, where there is this trade off between living for right now and then saving all of our money diligently for the future. And I happily encourage people to spend money, which is kind of weird for a financial advisor. But by pumping our money into our TSP and Roth IRAs early in our career, we are creating so many opportunities and good experiences in the future. Like, future you at a much younger age than pretty much everybody else in Civland will be so grateful if you actually did max out your TSP and your Roth IRA early in the.
So I totally agree. One thing that I would say as a word of caution is don't pass up unique experiences though for this that you'll never get the chance to do again. So I think back to my first billet going down to Antarctica on a polar icebreaker, right? We pulled into all over Australia, into Bali, Indonesia, into Hong Kong, like some places that I will honestly probably never go back to in my life, right? And I would have been really sad if I didn't do some of the tours or adventures or going out that I went on in those places that are fantastic and such great memories for me. And so, if it comes at some expense to that, then, maybe scaling back a little bit. And, this is where one of my favorite strategies is every time you get a raise, and usually early in your career, you're going to get them pretty often, at least every year for cost of living, but then there's longevity raises and there's promotions and advancements and that stuff. Is think about, can you invest half of that raise in more, so you get a $500 raise for for whatever reason, 250 goes into investments, 250 goes towards lifestyle, right? Until you hit that maxing out both your Roth TSP and your Roth IRA. And just for the vast majority of military, Roth is always the answer, right? There's very few times, depending on if you're married, what your spouse does. There's very few times that, for military, Roth doesn't make the right answer for you guys.
Yeah.
So balance against, your values and your statement of financial purpose. But yeah, you know, and my preferred one on it, Greg, and, feel free to disagree with me here, is get your match on your TSP first,
Hmm.
go to your Roth until it's maxed out, then come back to your TSP and start adding it. And that kind of gives you the most flexibility and gets you 100% of that free money that they're willing to give you out of the TSP.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that order. I would say the righteous trick maybe is not to call it saving. I would call this future spending, and to lean into one of the words you used, especially like your first deployment overseas, right? So I pulled into Norway and Scotland and France and all these very cool places. There is nothing wrong with setting a little bit aside, a little bit of money aside to really to build a better you, to gain that experience and immersion into a new culture. That is huge. Just make sure I guess that the key talking point here is do what you can without sacrificing financial stability. If you can put aside money for future spending into these accounts without creating additional risk and without entirely like living like a hermit and never leaving the boat, then yes, by all means, I would say max out the or fund the emergency fund, get the match if you're in the blended retirement system, fill out a Roth IRA, and then come back and fill out the rest of the TSP. I love that. Maybe you can't do all of it. And if you can't do all of it at once, don't beat yourself up for it. Like, there's no reason to carry around any guilt or baggage about that. For example, if you don't have this base level of emergency fund, like what good is a retirement account going to do if your car breaks down and you need $1,500 tomorrow? So there's always that. What can you do without sacrificing everything? Let's not have the, oh, I have to hit this rule of thumb, wag the planning dog.
And so the next question kind of dovetails into this really nicely. They said, okay, I'm kind of mid career, hit O3 E7, right? Probably E6 is more like it, right? What do I do different now? What do I need to do different?
Now, that's a great question. So, what change? I think we ask ourselves, well, what changes mid career? And I think, like, inside of the military, and maybe even outside of it, mid career is when your pay gets real, right? It's usually
Yep.
a big jump. I also think that's when life starts getting a little bit more complex. Kids start having sports, or you're getting married, or people are hitting their stride. So it's a lot harder to pivot. Right? So I think taking a moment to take stock of your situation. First, just know what point A looks like. Well, how are you financially? Or like, how are you in the other facets that aren't necessarily dollar signs? That's super important. Plus, I think the biggest question mid career, what I have to do to adjust for my financial plan is that's when you have the opportunity to say, hey, I've got 8 to 12 years in, am I staying? Right.
Yeah.
So there's always the 4 and done or 6 and done, depending on like choose your rate, choose your fate, where you don't really know. Maybe you re up for that huge, re-enlistment bonus. Maybe you don't. Like, I think in the first like 4 or 5 years, you understand like, oh, I absolutely cannot do this, or maybe I can. And then after that second stint or that second tour, it's like, all right, well, that was something. Do I have the endurance for 20?
Right.
I think that's actually probably the biggest question. What do you think?
So 100%, hopefully over time, so hopefully in your early career, you started tracking some financial metrics for yourself. So really looking at those and making sure, are you directionally heading in the right direction? And in my opinion, you're starting to get more real with those ultimate goals, right? And part of that is, am I staying in the military and making a career out of it and doing 20, or am I not, right? And that's probably the first thing that you need to decide. And then out of that, then it becomes to, I planning my exit, or am I planning what's going to make me successful all the way to 20, right? And I think those are the really important things. And so this, if it's the exit one, you need to really think about getting a larger emergency fund, probably up to 6 months, and then a really good transition fund is what I call it, because most veterans change jobs in the first 2 years, so you need to be prepared for that and probably hold on to that transition fund for 2 years, because employers can smell desperation on you, and you don't want to go in with that kind of attitude when you're thinking about negotiating. So
That's right.
really think about that, right? And it gives you the freedom to be able to pivot, and not have something bad happen to you or your family because of that pivot if you decide to get out. If you're staying in, now you're starting to think about, oh, what's the next billet that I should be taking, and where's that going to go, to help advance my career? And that may entail some financial trade-offs on doing that, right? Do you need to go, for officers in the Coast Guard, at least, do you need to go to headquarters? Which, to me, there's nothing worse than being stationed in DC. And so thankfully I avoided it. But that's a reality for some people that they have to go do, right? I'm sure there's something similar in the submarine force, right? Is it
Yeah.
Guam?
Yeah. You see a lot of them go down there. I actually, most of my favorite JOs did some follow up stint down at like the Navy Yard,
Okay.
but I see a lot of branches down there. The Air Force guys, they end up in Alexandria almost always working and then commuting into the city. I think in that mid career, it really is okay. So I would do first the calculus like, do I want to stay in longer or am I ready to transition out? Building that buffer, thinking about, well, what does my healthcare to look like? Because, right, like you might qualify for TRICARE as a veteran or like, veteran healthcare, but will your dependents still get it if you don't get a sizable disability rating? Right. So,
Right.
like, there's all these things that you're going to have to think about if we do make that transition. Now, let's pretend that you're going to stay in. It's, well, if you just choose to bail at 12 years, you're walking away from 30, 40, $50,000 of what your pension could have been. Right. At that midpoint, we're also starting to like I alluded to it earlier, you're dealing with bigger numbers. An '03, you're probably earning like 90 grand, uh,
Yeah.
right out of the gate, not assuming that you have any extra special pays. An E7, that's about 75, right? Ish, maybe 80. And then I know I talk to a lot of older folks that are still legacy or high 36, but if you're BRS, that TSP match, that 5% that the government's going to throw on top of your matching contribution, well, you're getting bigger pay now. So that number, or magnitude there, it compounds. It's pretty big. So those are some things that you need to think about mid-career is what do you want your career to look like? What leadership positions do you want? Do you want leadership positions? I'm hoping yes, because I look up to leaders. So I think everybody would aspire to be these people, but what kind of control do you want over that destiny, that path? And that needs to be part of your financial considerations.
Percent. And something that the other thing not to discount here when you're talking about that is a lot of our pay is tax advantage while you're on active duty. And
Okay.
so going in, DoD puts up what's called the RMC calculator, which basically just calculates what you would have to make on the outside to offset those tax advantages that you have. So going in and running that for yourself, it can be a little bit of an eye opener because that's a real basic like, oh yeah, like I say I make 90,000, but it's actually 120 is what I would need to make to get the same take home pay as I have right now. And so realizing that and making sure that there's just jobs in your career field that you could get that are going to get you to the same level that you want to. But yeah,
Just thinking tactically, if you're mid-career now and you're really starting to think and you're looking back at your service, I don't know many junior service members that are tracking a lot of this stuff unless maybe they took a class or had a great training command. But your life probably has more complexities. So making sure that you're continuously making sure that your medical record is up to date and tracking every little plight that you've ever had. Listen, as a JO, I didn't have an estate plan, but you can get the base documents for free at every single base legal. If you're at the stage of the game where now you have a wife or a husband or children or people that depend on you, mid-career, you should probably start thinking about your estate plan. Just bang out those documents, updating your beneficiaries in your TSP, SGLI. Those are some things that I would start to put a little bit more credence on or at that mid-career point than maybe I did as an '04.
100%. And I always like to ask people like, oh, so how many of you have an estate plan? Like when there's a group of people that I'm talking to, and like a few people raise their hands. And I was like, oh, everyone's hand should be up. It's just whether you chose to let the state decide what your estate plan is, or whether you're actively choosing it yourself. Because the end story there is the state has an estate plan drawn up for you, and it is probably not what you want. But it is
Exactly.
what you will get if you don't make an active choice on it. And so think about your local state government, how much you trust them, and whether or not you want them in charge of your estate and your family's future, right?
So I would say the big theme of mid-career is that you're shifting from I just have to survive to now's my opportunity to build wealth strategically.
Yep. And in that vein too, one of the biggest things I think, go back and look at your contribution level to your retirement accounts and everything. Make sure that you have increased it over time, right? And that it's still not set at 5% for the TSB, right? Which was the initial percentage that it was set at, and that it's gone up and that you're contributing. And that it's still in investments that are the ones you trust. TSP is easy. We know where they're going to put you unless you actively change it. it's a pretty good location to be for your Roth IRA, though, you may want to check. So I think that wraps up this episode again. So thank you again, Greg. And for everyone out there. So, make sure that you subscribe, please, for exclusive content and updates designed for military life. Whether you're a military member, a veteran, or a military spouse, this podcast is designed to help you build lasting wealth with strategies from the Military Financial Advisors Association. As your career progresses and success brings complexity to your finances, we at MFAA are here to help you. So please go to MFAA, their website, and find an advisor to help you navigate that complexity. You can visit militaryfinancialadvisors.org to get started. Thanks for listening. Hope you subscribe. Please give us a 5-star rating if you found this useful, and we'll see you next episode.
The information provided on Service to Savings, the Military Financial Advisors Association's podcast, is for general, informational, and educational purposes only. Nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as financial, investment, legal, or tax advice, nor is it intended to be an endorsement or recommendation of any specific product, service, or investment strategy. Always consult with a certified financial planning professional, preferably an MFAA member, before making any financial decisions, as your personal circumstances, including military benefits, TSP contributions, deployment-related finances, or retirement planning may require tailored advice.